moment, put you on the spot, right? What is a villain? Well, a villain is a character in a story or a play that opposes the hero. A villain is a deliberate scoundrel or criminal. A villain is one that is blamed for a particular or evil difficulty. You know, I find it very interesting that in our dictionary there are 3 definitions of what a villain is. A villain, well, it may actually just be a bad person. A villain, then again, may not be a bad person. They just may find themselves faced with a bad situation. Or a villain may just be the person that, well, is going against something that I believe in. And we villainize them all. And in this series, I've tried to give you a variety of different villains from the Bible. Now, I think I should let you know, Villainous was not the original working title of this sermon series. The original working title was Bad Boys in the Bible, and you can only imagine where I was headed with that. But then I got the idea, you know what, the problem is they're not all boys. There are just as many female villains as there are male villains, and so we got to give females their due. So when the females came in, that title had to go out, and I thought Bad People, that just didn't seem to fit. And it really wasn't until we went on vacation last year, and we were staying in the condo down at Outer Banks, and Caleb had brought this game that he had bought, and him and Benji had become kind of obsessed with it, and they were playing it. And I tried it once and decided it gave me a headache, but they love it very much. And when you look at it, this is what the cover sort of looks like. It just says Villainous. And what they had done is they had taken all of these Disney villains that are part of our culture and brought them in and made them where you could play the villains in the game. Of course, you know how my brain works, right? I'm thinking, they've got villains, I've got bad people. All I got to do is figure out how to take the people that I want to preach about and match them up to a character. The problem is I have to define the word villain for a Bible. And from a biblical perspective, guess what a villain is? A villain, as defined in the Bible, is anyone that stands in opposition to God. That's a villain. Why is that definition important that I only have one definition for a villain? Because, well, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 9 through 10. For I being Paul, the least of the apostles, do not even deserve to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was within me. See, anybody can be a villain. As a matter of fact, I could probably tell you from a biblical perspective, during my Christian walk, there have probably been times that I have been a villain. Because God says do it this way, and I'm like, no, God. Nope. We're going to try it my way. And at that point, I am now standing in opposition to God. Now, today our lesson is not on Saul/Paul, although he would have been a cool villain to pick on because he was the dastardly villain that becomes the ultimate hero only to die a martyr's death. That would be a cool story, but not where we're going, and obviously not where we're going because that doesn't fit the clip that I teased you with at the beginning of the service. The person that fits the clip, well, we're talking about this guy, and if you don't know who he is, his name is Scar. And well, when my boys saw that I was stealing from their game and dragging their game into my sermon series, they're like, well, you have to do Scar because he is the worst in the game as far as trying to win with. But yet, when you generally go do a survey of people that love Disney movies, Scar finishes consistently in the top 3 most favorite villains of all the Disney movies. He comes from the Lion King, and well, he has a goal. Scar wants to be king. There's only one small little problem. Standing in his way of Scar being king is his brother, Mufasa, and his son, Simba. And well, the only way that Scar can be king is they have to die. So Scar hatches up a plan using his hyena henchman. And by the way, Scar is just a bad person. They tried to drive that point home with that little marching hyena scene. That they were making a point. Scar is just an evil person. And Scar has decided, I'm going to kill my brother. I'm going to kill the king. And well, you know, brotherly hate when it comes to Scripture can be found everywhere. Ishmael was kicked out of his house for jealousy from Isaac's mother, his half-brother. Jacob took advantage of Esau, and well, Esau wanted to kill him for it. Joseph was sold into slavery after his brothers decided not to kill him, but instead turn a prophet. And well, the record goes to Abimelech, who actually killed 70 of his brothers. Not all from the same mom, by the way. 70 of his brothers for the purpose of becoming king, only to figure out he should have made it 71 because one got away. Darn the one that always seems to get away. He almost became today's sermon, but he didn't just make it. See, if we're going to talk about brotherly hate and we're going to talk about this topic of murder and what it means to murder, then you know what? We got to go way back in the Bible. Man, you got to go to Genesis chapter 4. So if you have your copy of God's Word, if you didn't bring one with you, there's one in the pew rack in front of you. Let me ask you to make your way to Genesis chapter 4, and we're going to look at the story of Cain and Abel. Now, this is a familiar story. If you grew up in church or you've been anywhere close to church, you probably know the story, but I'm going to kind of retell the story from a different angle. In fact, we're going to move not consecutively through the story. We're going to go back and forth in the story. And well, the story begins in Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. So Cain is the oldest. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to Abel. So we're talking about the very first family tree, which probably looked more like a family branch, or maybe we can call it a family sapling, because it just wasn't that many pieces and parts to it. But these were the firstborn sons of Adam and Eve. Now that's important. Now, they were the firstborn, but they weren't the last, because guess what? They would later, in chapter 5, verse 4, produce this child that was named Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. 800 years producing kids. Yeah, I think I'll pass. Seriously, 800 years, and all along the way they're producing sons and daughters, but these are the only three that get named by name, and of course that immediately makes me want to ask a question. I'm just that kind of person. Where are the girls? Well, it does say sons and daughters, so obviously they had girls, but none of the daughters of Adam and Eve were ever specifically mentioned by name. But here's some things that you should know. By the wording, when it says that Eve produced Cain first, she says, I received a man. She didn't say it was the first child. It's very possible that prior to Cain being the first boy, that there may have been other daughters before Cain. We don't know. We do know for a fact that between Cain and Abel, there was probably some other girls produced that never got named. Now you're saying, well, how do you know that? Well, I know that because, it's possible. I think I just lost my place. I did. Let me back that up. I didn't put that scripture up on the screen. It says, Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. So Cain had a wife, and that wife gave birth to a child, thus she must be female, and she had to come from somewhere, so that means that she was probably one of his sisters, and she was probably born either before him or maybe between Cain and Abel or maybe after Abel. But you get the idea that Adam and Eve had a lot of sons and daughters. And here's the point that I clicked too fast on. It's also quite possible that before the Cain and Abel event, that the sons and daughters had been marrying and many of them had started producing children. Maybe even Abel. Abel may have not only been the son of Cain, the brother of Cain, he may have been a father at this point. You see, it says in chapter 4, verses 13 and 14 of Genesis that Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be restless and wander on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." So you might be asking yourself, why is the family tree so important? Because a lot of times when we tell this story of Cain and Abel, this is how it was told to me in Sunday school. There was Adam, there was Eve, there was Cain, there was Abel. Cain killed Abel, and so now there's just Adam and Eve and Cain. And you understand, if that was the case, then who is Cain worried about hunting him down? There'd be nobody left except for mom and dad. You get the idea that these were grown men. And Adam had been produced kids all the way till he was 800 years old. He just kept producing kids, and they were producing kids. And there were more people on the planet at this point of this event than just Cain, Adam, and Eve. There were people everywhere. But here's the thing that you need to know. At this point that we're going to talk about with Cain and Abel, they were all one big happy family. We'll discuss the word happy in just a minute. There were no land disputes because guess what? Their family owned it all. There was no one to argue with. They had every scrap of land there was that belonged to this family. There were no cultural or national disputes. How do I know? Because everybody was from the same culture. And everybody had the same nationality because they all had the same mom and dad or grandma, grandpa, whatever Adam and Eve was to them. There were no economic issues. There was no poverty like we know it. There was no overpopulation. There was no politics. So I hate to tell you this, Cain was not a Democrat and Abel was not a Republican. There were no political parties at that point because there was no government. You know who the government was? Mom and dad. That made it kind of simple. And the reason this is all very important because when you get to the Cain and Abel event, the only diversification that you can find between Cain and Abel is not who they were, but what they did. Now, Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. So the only known difference between these two sons of Adam and Eve was the fact that Abel was somebody that tended sheep and Cain was somebody that kept the fields and grew produce. The only difference. And well, you would think, I have a problem here. Because if there's none of the issues that in our culture we usually associate with hate and murder, then how at the very beginning of this all did we end up with hate and, well, murder? Genesis chapter 4, verse 9. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." By the way, whenever your brother calls you to be by yourself with him, probably not going to end well. But Abel went along with it. And he says, while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. So much for happy family, right? Obviously, even without all the things that we associate with the idea of hate, we associate with the idea of murder, all of those things are absent, but we still end up with the Bible's first recorded murder. And you know why all of those things that we associate with murder had not really come into being yet? You know what was already there that we don't give enough credit to? It's called sin. Genesis chapter 4, verses 6 through 7. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do what is not right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." So even before we had all of the other social issues that we are struggling with in our society today, sin was at the root of the issue. Now, earlier this week, I sent you out an email, and it was kind of like a teaser to this sermon, so if you're on the list, you got it. And I asked you to read through the account of Cain and Abel, and I wanted you to come up with a one-word definition, a one-word motive of why Cain killed Abel. I'm going to give you a hint. It was in that scripture I just read you, and the word is not sin. There's something that happened that made Cain decide it's time to kill Abel. Now, the interesting about that particular verse that I just read you is we're not told what the sin was. Maybe Cain had a pride issue. Maybe he had a lust issue. Maybe he had a greed issue. Maybe he had an envy issue. Maybe he had a laziness issue. Maybe he was overindulged. Maybe it was just a malice issue. He just didn't like Abel because they're brothers. We're not told, but it's important that we're not told, because that means I can put any sin I want in there to try to justify and try to explain why sometimes, I'm going to say it, I'm guilty of murder. How do I know that? Well, because Jesus says that if you have any moment of hate in your life, then that is the same as and equal to committing murder. And I just want to know something. I have temper issues, and sometimes I can be a hateful person. I can. You catch me at the right moment, and you put me in the right situation. I've had this issue since I was a kid, and God mercifully has worked on it, and the spells are very rare. Do you actually see me really fly off? Matter of fact, you're probably in my family if you've actually seen the tip of the iceberg of the temper. But it's important to realize God didn't tell us what the sin was. He just wanted us to know this all begins with the sin issue. Now, when we look at sin, the other thing that I want you to see is there are some things that we do know about this event. Cain was angry. Yeah, I understand that one. So something happened that made Cain angry. And when Cain was angry, God described his face as downcast. Now, I like the way it looked, because you know what that meant? Cain chose to deal with his anger not by looking at God, but looking at himself. I'm angry, I'm upset, something didn't go to suit me, and I am going to look at myself to fix my issue. And now we're going to get to our word. Just curiosity, how many people here came up with the word jealousy? How many people came up with the word he was just angry? Problem is, those words aren't necessarily right where they were in Scripture. You know what Cain's real problem was? Cain wanted to be accepted. That's what happened. Cain wanted to be accepted by God. That was his entire issue. God said it himself, if you do the right thing, you'll be accepted. If you don't, then you won't. And Cain said, well, obviously, I want you to accept me, but there's a problem. Now, if I was to take that today and I was to rip out headlines from the newspaper and bring them in and start reading headlines to you, a lot of the anger and the hate and the frustration that we see in our world is connected to those statements. I'm angry. I'm upset. Why? Because I don't feel accepted. Everybody wants to feel accepted. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to feel that they're okay. Everybody wants some form of acceptance in their life. And the funny thing is that we want acceptance, and if we can't get God's acceptance, then what we kind of do is we kill off God. There is no God, and we start seeking acceptance from society. And then when society doesn't accept us, then we get what we have. This is your word. I want to be accepted. And the problem is that, well, what really needs to happen is I need to go back and get God to accept me. And, well, we want to be accepted, but we want it on our terms, not God's. We want God to change what he thinks, to change what he said, so that I can continue to live the life that I want to live. And, God, you'll just accept me like I am. And if there's one thing to learn from the story of Cain and Abel, isn't that Cain was a murderer, is that God says that's not the way it works. Matter of fact, God said unacceptable. That's what he said. Listen to the story. Genesis chapter 4, verse 3 and 4. Before there was a murder, before Cain was off in a field pouting, this is what started the entire situation. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor with Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So, notice, who was Cain really mad at? So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Was he mad at Abel? No. Was he mad at mom and dad? No. Was he mad at society? No. Who was he mad with? He's mad with God. He's mad at God because God did not accept him as he wanted to be accepted. God said, no. You understand, it doesn't quite work that way. Now, I have absolutely, positively, zero idea why God did not accept Cain's sacrifice. And I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of people that think they know, but a lot of what they said doesn't make sense. Maybe Cain's offering wasn't accepted because he brought the wrong thing. Now, when you think about sacrifice, we know how this is supposed to work, right? I mean, usually it's an animal, and the animal gets killed, and it's a blood sacrifice, and then they burn the animal, and that's how sacrifice was done. But you also need to remember that in those same places where we see blood sacrifices, there are also such thing as a grain sacrifice or a drink offering, which are also considered sacrifices, which are also burned. So therefore, it isn't necessarily about the animal. As a matter of fact, remember, we're all the way back at the beginning, the first family of the Bible, and so we don't have Abraham yet. We don't have Moses. Therefore, we don't have all the rules and regulations. Therefore, they've never heard of this thing that they call the law of Moses because he's a few hundred years down the road. So it isn't about that because he wasn't exactly told what to bring, at least not as I read. Now, maybe there's some unwritten rule, like in baseball, that you're not supposed to flip the bat. He knew exactly, and he just decided, I'm going to bring you whatever I want, God. You just have to accept it. You understand? God is not a whatever you want kind of God. That's not the way this works. Now, maybe you're thinking he did not bring the best thing, and that's quite possible. Think about what it said. It said that Abel brought some of the young ones, the first of his flock, the things that would be considered choice. And well, Cain, it says he offered some of the fruits. So maybe the issue was that Abel went and he picked out the very best that he had, the cream of the crop, and he came and he offered that to God. And as Cain was on his way to the sacrifice space, he says, oh yeah, I got to bring something with me. Well, I don't want to take these because these are the good-looking veggies. Okay, this is my bread and butter. I'm going to trade these for things I want. So I'll just grab these over here. I was going to burn them anyway. God's going to consume them in fire anyway. He won't mind, so he just scooped up the leftovers. And he come and he laid those before God and said, good enough? God said no. Isn't that amazing? And this is very convicting for me because I can't tell you how many times in my life I've scooped up the leftover parts of my life and said, here, God, what can you make with that? It's like when you go to the refrigerator, you haven't gone to the grocery store, you open up the fridge and say, so what's left over from a few nights before? And you take out a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you expect to make a fine meal from it, but really what you get is what? A hodgepodge of leftover pieces that maybe don't fit together. And a lot of times, that's us with God, folks. We come into his presence and we're saying, accept me, God, but I'm going to give you just the leftover portions. And God said, no, I'm not going to accept your leftovers. I want your best. I want that part of you that you think is the best part of your life. Now, maybe he offered the right thing, and maybe he offered the best that he had. Maybe his issue was he just offered it with the wrong heart. That seems to fit maybe what God is getting at here. I mean, he brought the fruits and vegetables, which was fine. And maybe he even said, man, okay, that is a pretty pepper. I mean, no blemishes on it, no marks, so that one's God. And look, this corn, all the rows are filled in, and they're nice and fat and juicy, so that one's God. Maybe he brought all of the right things, and he brought them with but in his heart, deep down inside of him, there was a sin that he said, you know what, I'm going to put my offering out there, but I'm not going to deal with the sin in my life. Isn't that what God told him? This idea, Cain, is not that you're just going to bring me things to watch me consume them with fire. We are dealing with an issue here, and while you're going through the motions of worship, you're not willing to deal with the issues in your life. Been there, done that, more often than I think. I come and I give God what I think He wants, and I give it the best that I've got. Good old college try. But let's be honest. I give it in hopes that God will take the offering and not ask me to deal with my life. That's hard, isn't it? And then what happens when God says no? Well, I'm not coming to that church anymore. They don't accept me like I am. Not going to do that anymore because God doesn't appreciate me for what He made me to be. You understand? God says, I want you to bring me what I asked you to bring me, the best of what you brought of you to me, and I want you to offer it to me in a way that you're willing to deal with your life, not just with, hey, God, let me drop a few coins in the plate. God, let me just make it acceptable. See, there are a couple things we know from this story. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but with Cain, his offering, He did not look with favor. God has the ability to say unacceptable. Change is needed. And we don't like that a lot of times. Do we? God, I want you to take me like I am, bad things and all. God will meet you right where you are, but He will never leave you there. He is going to, the moment you get in a relationship with Him, He is going to start working on those. And it may take a lifetime to get them all fixed, but God is never going to stop asking you to strive for the best you can be in a relationship with Him. Just like your husband and wife wouldn't. Just like your kids wouldn't. They expect us to be all that we can be. Here's the other thing that we know from this story. Cain had a choice. So he's at the altar and he's offered his grain, and Abel has offered the little pieces of fat, and you got to get the picture. His was all pretty and pristine, like the horn of plenty at Thanksgiving, and this one was all bloody and burnt. And I'm sure Cain's thinking, mine looks prettier, God. God's like, but that's not acceptable. And at that point, Cain had a choice. Get right with God, or get even for not being accepted. Now think about the logic. So I'm mad at God because God didn't do it the way I wanted it done. So I'm mad at God, but what am I going to do to God? Nothing I can do, right? I mean, He's God, I'm not. It's not like I'm going to stage a coup and overthrow heaven, right? But what can I get even with? I'll show you, God. You accepted Him and not me. I'm going to kill him. That's what happened there. That's the moment of the first murder. It had nothing to do with Abel. And while ultimately jealousy drove him and anger drove him, but it had nothing to do with those emotions that we feel. It all has to do with the idea that we want God to accept us, but we're often not willing to make the choice to do the things that God asks us to be accepted. And that, my friends, is hard. That is difficult. And it's hard for me to say, and I'm sure it's hard for you to hear. I played that clip at the beginning of the worship service, and it was called Be Prepared. His intent, Scar, was to call his hyena henchman to prepare to kill the king, his brother. And he wanted to make sure everybody was prepared for him to be the king. Scar is bemoaning the fact that Mufasa is in charge of his life and not him. He's going to kill the king. Ironically, once Scar succeeds, and he does, he kills Mufasa and runs Simba off, the one that got away. Another sermon, another day. He runs Simba off, and he becomes king. You know what the funny thing is? He almost destroys the kingdom. Boy, wouldn't that preach? When I make myself the king of my own kingdom, you realize what I've done, right? I've kicked God out, and I said, God, no more you, no more of that. I am king of my world. Be prepared. I'm in charge. And you understand what happens, right? I will destroy the kingdom. Because that's not the way it's supposed to work. That's not how this was going to work. You see, Scar forgot one very important verse. And we forget it too. It comes from a wise old man named Solomon. Proverbs chapter 21, verse 3. To do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. To do what is right, to do what God asks of our life, is more pleasing to God than to come here and sing a song. To do what is right before the Lord is more important to God than that you say a prayer. To do what is right before God is more important than you read the Bible. Although all of those things will help you do the right thing, those are not the things that please God. This is a relationship-based faith. And God says if you want to be accepted in a relationship, then you understand you are going to have to make some changes in your life. So now let's take a look at our lives. Are they acceptable? When I was growing up, and I guess I would have been a senior in high school when they taught us this. They taught us this little thing. They used to call it continuous witnessing training. They taught you how to lead somebody to Christ. And it always started out with the same question. Here's the question. If today was your day, and you were going to stand before God, and He was going to look you in the eye and say, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you tell Him? What would your answer be? Well, God, I got a nice truck. You can have that. And I've got some bank accounts, so maybe I could cash those out and lay those at your feet. And maybe I could sell the house, and we could bring that and give that to you. And I can't technically give you my kids because they're people, and they have to make their own choice. But God, I'll cash out everything I've got. God, I can give you some religious pedigree. I've got degrees from Bible college downstairs. I've got an ordination certificate from another church. God, somewhere in somebody's garage, in somebody's attic or basement, I've got a certificate that says Barry was baptized. How about I lay that one there? Am I acceptable? Is that what it's going to take? No. I'm going to give you the answer to the question. But just because you know the answer doesn't mean you've got the solution. You know what the answer to the question is? Why should I let you into my heaven? It's a one-word answer. Jesus. That's it. That's the only acceptable answer. God, I got nothing for you. I got no good deeds that are good enough. I got no money that's enough. I got no truck that you think would be important. I got nothing. But let me tell you something. When I was 11 years old, I met this guy, and his name was Jesus. And I accepted him wholeheartedly in my life. And yes, there were times in my life that I didn't live it like I should, but we have walked this relation together, and we've grown in it. And you know what? I got nothing to offer you but him. You know what God says? That's acceptable. That's what I want. That's what I need in your life. But to have that, guess what that means? I have to be willing to surrender my life to the relationship with Him. Not on my terms. This is not a negotiation. I have to surrender my life on His terms. And He says, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. That's acceptable in the eyes of God. I want to ask the worship team to make their